Hello and welcome to this short explainer video on the inquiry, when was it safest to speak your mind in Tudor England? Now these photos should seem familiar, not the one you're looking at right now, but these images here, because these images come from the first lesson you did, and if you'd read through it carefully you would see that this story is an up and down, and hence why sometimes historians and teachers refer to this period almost like a roller coaster. It was safest to speak your mind at certain points depending on who you were. So, who you were relates to particular religions you were. So one of the things we really need to understand with this inquiry is who the Protestants and who the Catholics were. Now on the left hand side is a picture of Martin Luther. In lesson 2 you would have picked up some detailed knowledge of who he was. A critic of the Catholic Church led by this man here, Pope Leo X. The Pope's the head of the Catholic Church, and England had historically been, up until the period of the Tudors, a Catholic country, following the doctrine, the ideas of this man and this man's church, the Catholic Church. However, during our period we see, as part of this roller coaster, a move towards a Protestant nation, and by the end of our course England is overtly, clearly, explicitly a Protestant country. So to take you through the story of that journey, of that roller coaster, we begin with an early Henry VIII. Now early Henry VIII, up until the period of roughly 1530, historians have argued was a deeply Catholic king. Okay, and we can think here of some examples, or some, let's say, victims of this Catholicism, when we think of people like William Tyndale, who was burnt at the cross, probably under the orders, we don't know for sure, of spies employed by Thomas More, one of Henry VIII's close Catholic advisors. So it was at that time very dangerous to be a Protestant, because Tyndale himself was a follower, or at least a supporter, of some of Luther's ideas and was critical of the Catholic Church. So it was not safe to speak your mind for people like William Tyndale. We move into the mid-reign of Henry VIII, and his move or shift towards a more Protestant religion, or certainly more critical of the Pope, and this is partly because of this image here, his attempts to try and marry Anne Boleyn, which the Pope will not allow. And here we think of certain people during Henry VIII's reign who actually fall out of favour. So someone like the aforementioned Thomas More, who was a Catholic before he was eventually executed for failing or being unwilling to support Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn. And we see the rise here of figures like Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell himself was influenced by Protestant ideas, and certainly some at the time thought he was Protestant. However, Cromwell is an example here of a man who maybe earlier on in the reign would not have been able to speak his mind, but during this middle reign of Henry VIII we see the beginnings of an attempt, well, the beginnings of Protestants being able to speak their mind in England. But Henry VIII is not a simple figure, as you may well know, because from 1540 onwards he returns to some of his Catholic beliefs, and certainly some of those Protestants or Protestant influenced people within his court are kicked out. We can think here of most obviously Thomas Cromwell, who in 1540 is executed. And so we think here that maybe Henry VIII goes through three periods. A period where it is safe to speak your mind if you are Catholic. In the middle period, it's safer to speak your mind if you are more critical of the Catholic Church, potentially slightly Protestant, although we need to be careful. You still can't say everything you think. And then in the final period, Henry VIII returning to some of those Catholic beliefs, making it safer to speak your mind if you were a Catholic than a Protestant. But what happens next? Well, Henry VIII dies, and his son, Edward VI, takes the throne. Now, Edward VI, the son of Jane Seymour, if you read the reading carefully, you will know this. But Edward VI is a very important figure because he is the first English monarch who is brought up a Protestant, and during this time the Protestant reforms make it safe to speak your mind if you were a Protestant, and Edward VI actually represses some Catholic thought. Now we can think here of some of the figures under Edward VI who rise in power. Archbishop Cranmer, who is a notable Protestant, who was around during Henry VIII's time but had to keep very quiet, couldn't speak his mind, was now able to speak his mind and be very, very powerful. And he actually ends up changing a lot of the religion of the English during this time by editing some of the prayer books and by enforcing some of these reforms, such as the banning of the holidays, such as Corpus Christi. So this time under Edward VI, this roller coaster, we are now in a period where it is safer to speak your mind if you are Protestant, and it is not so safe if you are Catholic. But wait, who comes next? Mary I. Now Mary is actually also another of the children of Henry VIII. This time he is the first child of Henry VIII, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, and Henry. And she is a passionate Catholic, and she tries to reverse some of the changes that Edward had brought in. She brings back the Pope as the head of the church in England. She brings back certain figures like Cardinal Pole, who'd been exiled, kicked out of the country under Henry VIII, and she becomes a Catholic monarch. England returns to Catholicism, and at this time it is safer to speak your mind as a Catholic than a Protestant. And examples of this are people like Cranmer, who, as we mentioned before, was powerful under Edward VI, is burnt to death under Mary I for being a heretic, so meaning that he goes against official religion. So at this time, certainly it's unsafe to be and speak your mind if you are a Protestant. But it doesn't end there, because, as I said, it's a roller coaster. In 1558, Mary dies, and another child of Henry VIII takes the throne. This time, Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth is brought up a Protestant, or she's brought up under the Church of England, and she certainly has Protestant ideas. However, she seeks a kind of middle way, which doesn't try to reverse everything and anything that Mary did, but equally wants to return England to a system where she, as a monarch, is head of the church, and that England has its own church, the Church of England. Now, most historians originally would say that Elizabeth had a kind of middle way. That means some Catholics, some Protestant beliefs, and you could speak your mind if you were either. It's not that clear, and actually we know that through her use of spies and through her use of laws, she repressed a lot of Catholics in the country. And we see an example of this under her chief advisor, Sir Francis Walsingham, who was a passionate Protestant and sought out Catholics in the country to either arrest them or to repress them. She also brought in recusancy laws, which meant that you had to go to church, and people who refused to attend the church were punished. So that's a long story of when it was safest to speak your mind in Tudor England. The answer, simple answer, is it depends who you were. If you were Catholic, there were certain safer moments, particularly under Mary I and early Henry VIII. And if you were Protestant, it was certainly safer to speak your mind under Edward VI and then under Elizabeth. And there were times under Henry where you began to be able to speak your mind. Okay, so this period of Tudor England is a period of change. There is a period of change going on, and that change is experienced differently depending on who you were. If you were a Catholic, it was experienced one way. If you were a Protestant, it was experienced another. And in your answers to this question, I'm really looking to see examples of individuals who typify the point you're trying to make. They explain that it was unsafe if you were a Catholic. So I'm thinking here of figures like Cardinal Pole, who was kicked out of the country under Henry VIII, or I'm thinking here of figures like Thomas Cranmer, who was powerful under Edward VI and executed under Mary I. And how you're going to explain this, how you're going to show this, how you're going to develop this thought, you have three options. These options are either to write an essay, to design a poster. You could do even like a kind of roller coaster of your own if you'd like, showing when it was safest and least safe, depending on what religion you were. And you could finally also write a speech to deliver to your family. What's really important here is I want to see that distinguishing between when you were a Protestant or if you were a Catholic. When was it safest to speak your mind? Okay. If you need any help, ask in the comments, but good luck.